Hello and welcome to the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and I am excited to be joined once again by my friend and co-host, Zen Garcia. Are you there, sir?
I am, brother. Good to be here with you again.
Yeah, man. So last week, we did sort of a review of Genesis chapter 6, and kind of got caught up again on that since we spent so much time doing the book of Enoch. Tonight I thought maybe we could read the Jasher and Jubilees stuff related to Genesis 6 and the lead up to Genesis 6. So that would mean we would begin in Jasher chapter 4, which I've got queued up on my end. If you wanted to get any kind of maybe Jubilees or Targum or anything else that you might have, we could jump into.
Yeah, I can pull up Jubilees because I did read a lot of the other stuff last week with regard to this particular topic. And
Okay.
so, yeah, I'll pull up Jubilees and you can read from Jasher.
All right, let me get that ready over here. And I will read from Jasher, beginning in chapter 4. And all the days that Enoch lived upon earth were 365 years. And when Enoch had ascended into heaven, all the kings of the earth rose and took Methuselah his son and anointed him, and they caused him to reign over them in the place of his father. And Methuselah acted uprightly in the sight of God, as his father Enoch had taught him. And he likewise, during the whole of his life, taught the sons of men wisdom, knowledge, and the fear of God, and he did not turn from the good way either to the right or to the left. But in the latter days of Methuselah, the sons of men turned from the Lord. They corrupted the earth, they robbed and plundered each other, and they rebelled against God, and they transgressed, and they corrupted their ways, and would not hearken to the voice of Methuselah, but rebelled against him. And the Lord was exceedingly wroth against them, and the Lord continued to destroy the seed in those days, so that there was neither sowing nor reaping in the earth. For when they sowed the ground in order that they might obtain food for their support, behold, thorns and thistles were produced, which they did not sow. And still the sons of men did not turn from their evil ways, and their hands were still extended to do evil in the sight of God, and they provoked the Lord with their evil ways, and the Lord was very wroth, and repented that he had made men. And he thought to destroy and annihilate them, and he did so. In those days, when Lamech, the son of Methuselah, was 160 years old, Seth, the son of Adam, died. And all the days that Seth lived were 912 years, and he died. And Lamech was 180 years old when he took Ashmua, the daughter of Elishah, the son of Enoch, his uncle, and she conceived. And at that time the sons of men sowed the ground, and a little food was produced, yet the sons of men did not turn from their evil ways, and they trespassed and rebelled against God. And the wife of Lamech conceived and bare him a son at that time at the revolution of the year. And Methuselah called his name Noah, saying, the earth was in his days at rest and free from corruption. And Lamech his father called his name Menachem, saying, this one shall comfort us in our works and miserable toil in the earth, which God had cursed. And the child grew up and was weaned, and he went in the ways of his father Methuselah, perfect and upright with God. And all the sons of men departed from the ways of the Lord in those days, as they multiplied upon the face of the earth with sons and daughters, and they taught one another their evil practices, and they continued sinning against the Lord. And every man made unto himself a god, and they robbed and plundered every man his neighbor as well as his relative, and they corrupted the earth, and the earth was filled with violence. And their judges and rulers went to the daughters of men and took their wives by force from their husbands according to their choice. And the sons of men in those days took from the cattle of the earth, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the air, and taught the mixture of animals of one species with the other, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw the whole earth, and it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth, all men and all animals. And the Lord said, I will blot out man that I created from the face of the earth, yea, man to the birds of the air, together with cattle and beasts that are in the field, for I repent that I made them. And all men who walked in the ways of the Lord died in those days, before the Lord brought the evil upon man, which he had declared. For this was from the Lord, that they should not see the evil which the Lord spoke of concerning the sons of men. And Noah found grace in the sight of the Lord, and Noah chose him and his children to rise up seed from upon the face of the whole earth. That's Jasher 4.
Okay, I actually had pulled up the Legends of the Jews.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, so I'm going to read this, and then afterwards you can read Jubilees. Because this is interesting. It fits right in with what you were talking about. And I'm going to start with Enosh. Enosh was asked who his father was, and he named Seth. The questioners, the people of his time, continued, who was the father of Seth? Enosh, Adam. And who was the father of Adam? He had neither father nor mother. God formed him from the dust of the earth, but man has not the appearance of dust. After death, man returns to dust, as God said, and man shall turn again into dust. But on the day of his creation, man was made in the image of God. How was the woman created? Male and female he created them. But how? God took water and earth and molded them together in the form of man. But how? Pursued the questioners. Enosh took 6 clods of earth, mixed them, and molded them, and formed an image of dust and clay. But said the people, this image does not walk, nor does it possess any breath of life. He then essayed to show them how God breathed the breath of life into the nostrils of Adam. But when he began to blow his breath into the image he had formed, Satan entered it, and the figure walked, and the people of his time, who had been inquiring these matters of Enosh, went astray after it, saying, what is the difference between bowing down before this image and paying homage to a man? The generation of Enosh were thus the first idol worshippers, and the punishment for their folly was not delayed long. God caused the sea to transgress its bound, and a portion of the earth was flooded. This was the time also when the mountains became rocks, and the dead bodies of men began to decay. And still another consequence of the sin of idolatry was that the countenances of the men of the following generations were no longer in the likeness and the image of God, as the countenances of Adam, Seth, and Enosh had been. They resembled centaurs and apes, and the demons lost their fear of men. But there was a still more serious consequence from the idolatrous practices introduced in the time of Enosh. When God drove Adam forth from paradise, the Shekinah remained behind, enthroned above, a cherub under the tree of life. The angels descended from heaven and repaired thither in hosts to receive their instruction, and Adam and his descendants say by the gate, to bask in the splendor of the Shekinah, 65,000 times more radiant than the splendor of the sun. This brightness of the Shekinah makes all upon whom it falls exempt from disease, and neither insects nor demons can come nigh unto them to do them harm. Thus it was until the time of Enosh, when men began to gather gold, silver, gems, pearls from all parts of the earth, and made idols thereof 1,000 parsangs high. What was worse, by means of the magic arts taught them by the angels Uzzah and Azazel, they set themselves as masters over the heavenly spheres, and forced the sun, moon, and stars to be subservient to themselves instead of the Lord. This impelled the angels to ask God, what is man that thou art mindful of him? Why didst thou abandon the highest of the heavens, the sea of thy glory and thy exalted throne in Arabat, and descend to men who pay worship to idols, putting thee upon a level with them? The Shekinah was induced to leave the earth and ascend to heaven. amid the blare and flourish of the trumpets of the myriads of angel hosts. The depravity of mankind, which began to show itself in the time of Enosh, had increased monstrously in the time of his grandson Yared, by reason of the fallen angels. When the angels saw the beautiful, attractive daughters of men, they lusted after them and spoke, "We will choose wives for ourselves only from among the daughters of men, and beget children with them." Their chief Semyaza said, "I fear me ye will not put this plan of yours into execution, and I alone shall have to suffer the consequences of a great sin." Then they answered him and said, "We will all swear an oath, and we will bind ourselves separately and together not to abandon the plan, but to carry it through to the end." 200 angels descended to the summit of Mount Hermon, which owes its name to this very occurrence, because they bound themselves there to fulfill their purpose, on the penalty of Herem, anathema. Under the leadership of 20 captains, they defiled themselves with the daughters of men, unto whom they taught charms, conjuring formulas, how to cut roots, and the efficacy of plants. The issue from these mixed marriages was a race of giants, 3,000 ells tall, who consumed the possessions of men. When all had vanished and they could obtain nothing more from them, the giants turned against men and devoured many of them, and the remnant of men began to trespass against the birds, beasts, reptiles, and fishes, eating their flesh and drinking their blood. Then the earth complained about the impious evildoers, but the fallen angels continued to corrupt mankind. Azazel taught men how to make slaughtering knives, arms, shields, and coats of mail. He showed them metals and how to work them, and amulets and all sorts of trinkets, and the use of rouge for the eyes, and how to beautify the eyelids, and how to ornament themselves with the rarest and most precious jewels, and all sorts of paints. The chief of the fallen angels, Shemyaza, instructed them in exorcisms and how to cut roots. Armaros taught them how to raise spells, Barakel, divination from the stars, Kakabel, astrology, Ezekiel, augury from the clouds, Arakiel, the signs of the earth, Samsawiel, the signs of the sun, and Sariel, the signs of the moon. While all these abominations defiled the earth, the pious Enoch lived in a secret place. None among men knew his abode, or what had become of him, for he was sojourning with the angel watchers and holy ones. Once he heard the call addressed to him, "Enoch, thou scribe of justice, go unto the watchers of the heaven, who have left the high heavens, the eternal place of holiness, defiling themselves with women, doing as men do, taking wives unto themselves, and casting themselves into the arms of destruction upon earth. Go and proclaim unto them that they shall find neither peace nor pardon. For every time they take joy in their offspring, they shall see the violent death of their sons, and sigh over the ruin of their children. They will pray and supplicate evermore, but never shall they attain to mercy or peace." Enoch repaired to Azazel and the other fallen angels to announce the doom uttered against them. They all were filled with fear. Trembling seized upon them, and they implored Enoch to set up a petition for them and read it to the Lord of heaven, for they could not speak with God as aforetime, nor even raise their eyes heavenward, for shame on account of their sins. Enoch granted their request, and in a vision he was vouchsafed the answer which he was to carry back to the angels. It appeared to Enoch that he was wafted into heaven upon clouds, and was set down before the throne of God. God spake, "Go forth and say to the watchers of heaven, who have sent thee hither to intercede for them, verily it is you who ought to plead in behalf of men, not men in behalf of you. Why did ye forsake the high, holy, and eternal heavens, to pollute yourselves with the daughters of men, taking wives unto yourselves, doing like the races of the earth, and begetting giant sons? Giants begotten by flesh and spirits will be called evil spirits on earth, and on the earth will be their dwelling place. Evil spirits proceed from their bodies because they are created from above, and from the holy watchers is their beginning and primal origin. They will be evil spirits on earth, and evil spirits they will be named. And the spirits of heaven have their dwelling in heaven, but the spirits of the earth which were born upon the earth have their dwelling on the earth. And the spirits of the giants will devour, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and cause destruction on the earth, and work affliction. They will take no kind of food, nor will they thirst, and they will be invisible. And these spirits will rise up against the children of men, and against the women, because they have proceeded from them. Since the days of murder and destruction and the death of the giants, when the spirits went forth from the soul of their flesh, in order to destroy without incurring judgment, thus will they destroy until the day when the great consummation of the great world be consummated. And now, as to the watchers who have sent thee to intercede for them, who had been aforetime in heaven, say to them, you have been in heaven, and though the hidden things had not yet been revealed to you, you know worthless mysteries, and in the hardness of your hearts you have recounted these to the women, and through these mysteries women and men work much evil on earth. Say to them, therefore, you have no peace. I'll just read this last part about Enoch and then turn it to you. After Enoch had lived a long time secluded from men, he once heard the voice of an angel calling to him, Enoch, Enoch, make thyself ready and leave the house and the secret place wherein thou hast kept thyself, hidden, and assume dominion over men, to teach them the ways in which they shall walk, and the deeds which they shall do, in order that they may walk in the ways of God. Enoch left his retreat and betook himself to the haunts of men. He gathered them about him and instructed them in the conduct pleasing to God. He sent messengers all over to announce, ye who desire to know the ways of God and righteous conduct, come ye to Enoch. Thereupon a vast concourse of people thronged about him to hear the wisdom he would teach and learn from his mouth what is good and right. Even kings and princes, no less than 130 in number, assembled about him and submitted themselves to his dominion to be taught and guided by him. As he taught and guided all the others, peace reigned thus over the whole world, all the 243 years during which the influence of Enoch prevailed. At the expiration of this period, in the year in which Adam died and was buried with great honors by Seth, Enosh, Enoch, and Methuselah, Enoch resolved to retire again from intercourse with men and devote himself wholly to the service of God. But he withdrew gradually. First he would spend 3 days in prayer and praise of God, and on the 4th day he would return to his disciples and grant them instruction. Many years passed thus, then he appeared among them, but once a week, later once a month, and finally once a year. The kings, princes, and all others who were desirous of seeing Enoch and hearkening to his words did not venture to come close to him during the times of his retirement. Such awful majesty sat upon his countenance, they feared for their very life if they but looked at him. They therefore resolved that all men should prefer their request before Enoch on the day he showed himself unto them. The impression made by the teachings of Enoch upon all who heard them was powerful. They prostrated themselves before him and cried, long live the king, long live the king. On a certain day, while Enoch was giving audience to his followers, an angel appeared and made known unto him that God had resolved to install him as king over the angels in heaven, as until then he had reigned over men. He called together all the inhabitants of the earth and addressed them thus, I have been summoned to ascend into heaven, and I know not on what day I shall go thither. Therefore I will teach you wisdom and righteousness before I go hence. A few days yet Enoch spent among men, and all the time left to him he gave instruction in wisdom, knowledge, God-fearing conduct, and piety, and established law and order for the regulation of the affairs of men. Then those gathered near him saw a gigantic steed descend from the skies, and they told Enoch of it, who said, "The steed is for me, for the time has come, and the day when I leave you, never to be seen again." So it was. The steed approached Enoch, and he mounted upon its back, and all the time instructing the people, exhorting them, enjoining them to serve God and walk in his ways. 800,000 of the people followed a day's journey after him, but on the second day Enoch urged his retinue to return back. "Go ye home, lest death overtake you, if you follow me farther." Most of them heeded his words and went back, but a number remained with him for 6 days. And though he admonished them daily to return and not bring death down upon themselves, on the 6th day of the journey he said to those still accompanying him, "Go ye home, for on the morrow I shall ascend to heaven, and whoever will then be near me, he will die." Nevertheless, some of his companions remained with him, saying, "Whithersoever thou goest, we will go. By the living God, death alone shall part us." On the 7th day, Enoch was carried into the heavens in a fiery chariot, drawn by fiery chargers. The day thereafter, the kings who had turned back in good time sent messengers to inquire into the fate of the men who had refused to separate themselves from Enoch, for they had noted the number of them. They found snow and great hailstones upon the spot whence Enoch had risen, and when they searched beneath, they discovered the bodies of all who had remained behind with Enoch. He alone was not among them. He was high in heaven. This is the last part. This was not the first time Enoch had been in heaven. Once before, while he sojourned among men, he had been permitted to see all there is on earth and in heavens. On a time when he was sleeping, a great grief came upon his heart, and he wept his dream, not knowing what the great grief meant, nor what would happen to him. And there appeared to him 2 men, very tall. Their faces shone like the sun, and their eyes were like burning lamps, and fire came forth from their lips. Their wings were brighter than gold, their hands whiter than snow. They stood at the head of Enoch's bed and called him by his name. He awoke from his sleep and hastened and made obeisance to them and was terrified. And these men said to him, "Be of good cheer, Enoch, be not afraid. The everlasting God hath sent us to thee, and lo, today thou shalt ascend with us into heaven. And tell thy sons and thy servants, and let none seek thee till the Lord bring thee back to them." It just goes into, as far as taking him up into heaven and showing him the seven heavens and all, which is the second book of Enoch, but I won't go into all that.
All right, and I would say that takes us to the break right now, so we will continue to get back from break. Back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and we are continuing our study of the book of Genesis. This time we are going through some of the extra biblical texts that talk about a lot of the same things that are covered in the book of Genesis. I was reading from the book of Jasher before the break, and by the way, I have the book of Genesis with a King James and Septuagint side by side, like a parallel Bible, and the full book of Enoch, the full book of Jasher, and the full book of Jubilees, all compiled into one volume called Genesis and the Synchronized Biblically Endorsed Extra Biblical Texts book. And people want to blast me saying that that's a globe on the front cover. Well, first of all, I published that book in 2013, which was 2 full years before I got into biblical cosmology. But now, so that I don't have to redo the cover, what I tell people is, no, that's the circle of the earth just viewed at an angle, see? So you're looking at the outer rim there of the circle. That way I don't have to redo the cover. So that's available on Amazon if you guys want to check that out. So yeah, I was reading Jasher chapter 4, and you were reading from, what was that, the Legend of the Jews?
Legends of the Jews, and it's the fall of the angels. Well, the first part was Enosh because I wanted to talk about,
Hmm.
the idolatry, and then led into the fall of the angels, and then the Enoch as king and prophet,
Yeah.
which
So
is all part chapter 3 in the Legends of the Jews.
let me pull up Genesis chapter 5. Genesis chapter 5 talks about so and so beget so and so. And let me see. Enos. It was in the days of Enosh that men began to call upon the name of the Lord. Um,
Hmm.
is that in 5? Let me see. I don't see it here. And the days of Seth. Huh. I thought it was in Enos. I thought it was in Genesis chapter 5. What is it?
Yeah, I thought so too, because that's the generations of Adam.
Right, maybe it was in 4. Cain is all Cain and 4. Cain, Lamech, the other Lamech. Oh, no, it was the end of chapter 4. That's what it was. Chapter 4:26. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enosh. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. Now, that sounds good, right?
Right.
But the more I looked into that, and again that word began there, began to call. That's the same word that's used where Nimrod began to become a mighty one in the earth, and
Hmm.
it has a connotation of profaning oneself. Can also be translated as with regard to prostitution and things of that nature. So I guess the word legitimately can be translated as began, but the more I looked into various extra biblical texts, more and more I kept seeing that no, it was in those days that men began to profane the name of the
Hmm.
Lord, and that's when they actually started the practice of worshiping false gods and
Right.
creating idols and things of that nature. Now, in the passage that you were reading from, was that Ginsburg's Legends of the Jews?
Yes, Legends of the Jews. Yes.
So, wow! In the beginning of it, I had read that before, but I didn't catch it. Um, the beginning part when you first started reading, it was talking about they created animal-human hybrids and centaurs specifically.
Right.
Um, that was in the context of a pre-flood world, create the creation of centaurs. So, um, and that seemed like it was actually earlier than in the latter days of Methuselah, at least in the chronology that you were reading. Did
Right.
so it sounded like they were already creating animal-human hybrids even before the Genesis 6:12, Jasher 4:18
Yeah, it seems so.
time period.
According to that narrative, yeah.
And that's interesting. So
Hmm.
now do you have that text still in front of you?
Yeah, let me pull it up here.
So was it saying that the centaurs? I mean, that just jumped out at me when you're talking about centaurs. Did did that happen as a result of copulation or as a result of some kind of manipulation teaching of the Watchers?
Let me read it again. Um, we see that Satan enters into the idol and then has it walking, and that's when, the people are led astray. Uh, okay, I'm looking for. Oh, okay, here it is. All right, I'll just read that paragraph. It says, and this is right after the idol walks. The generation of Enos were thus the first idol worshippers, and the punishment for their folly was not delayed long. God caused the sea to transgress its bounds, and a portion of the earth was flooded, which that's an interesting part as well.
Well, yeah, that's a pre-flood flood,
Yeah,
which is also covered in Jasher,
yes,
because Jasher tells you also that that men began to profane and go after idols and all that stuff during the days of Enosh, and that it was at that time that God caused the river, the Gihon River, to overflow and flood a third of the earth. Now, I don't know if that's Earth as in world or Earth as in the area of land where they were living.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw that, yeah, I had already, since going back to 2009, I had taken a snapshot sort of off of Google Earth, of the Mediterranean area, and going as far east as to just beyond Babylon, and, Iraq and all that. And, I just felt like that the center of the Earth, there's lots of research that shows the center, the geographical landmass of the Earth was the Giza Plateau. And so I put a compass needle in the center of Giza, and then I used the pen and went out to Babylon, Iraq, and just drew a circle. And I imagined that circle to be the region on Earth called Eden, within which the garden was, and within which the flood took place in that land. And if that is true, that's pure speculation on my part, I admit it. But if that speculation is true, then a third of that landmass that I had put in a circle there is the area that we now call the Mediterranean Sea. So,
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
which just so happens to be off the coast of the land we call Israel,
Mm-hmm.
within which the Gihon post-flood is submerged. It's under the ground now. You have the Gihon Spring, which is one of the reasons why I no longer believe the Temple Mount is the Temple Mount, because the Gihon is described as being under the temple, and they use that water to, that's a lot of blood from all the sacrifices and stuff that they do there, and that they had some kind of mechanism whereby they could pump up the water from the Gihon into the temple to clean up all that mess.
Right.
But the Gihon does not go under what we call the Temple Mount today. It kind of goes around it and then goes under the city of David, which is the location I believe that the temple was actually located. The temple was located in the city of David, and in that place, not one stone is left upon another. They even disassembled the entire mountain.
Right.
They kind of leveled that area out. And so that is a fulfillment when Yeshua said, not one stone. If you go to the Temple Mount, there's all kinds of stones on top of another, both above ground and underground. You can go underground and see, stuff that had been buried that was one stone upon the other. Whereas the city of David area completely obliterated, like boom, like I think they used that area to build up other areas, like in the actual Temple Mount area, what we call the Temple Mount, if I'm not mistaken. But at any rate, that's my opinion on that, and that the Gihon is now underground, post-flood, but and I believe that it pops back up again though, and is now what we call the Nile River, because it says that it encircles the land of Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the land of Israel and then you look at where Ethiopia is, the only river that fits that description is the Nile. I don't think the Nile goes all the way to Ethiopia today, but if you follow the topography and just look at the lowlands and highlands, you can see where if it was a mightier, more powerful river, you could see how it could have easily followed a trajectory, to encompass the Horn of Africa and go into Ethiopia, that whole area right there, and kind of go around the Horn of Africa, come back up, and then connect with the Pison in the various gulfs that are over there. So again, if that speculation is true, if that land mass was known as Eden at that time, then the flood that you're talking about there in the Legends of the Jews, which is also in the book of Jasher. And this is one of the reasons also that I give credibility to the book of Jasher. I know people want to poo-poo it and throw it out and say, no, it's a middle, medieval forgery, they want to say. They always want to say, it showed up in the medieval days. Well, copies of it did, but
yeah, exactly.
Joseph Lumpkin and Ken Johnson both show that the version that we have today in English traces back through the Middle Ages, actually all the way back to 70 A.D., to a scribe that was hiding, like he had a bunch of scrolls in his possession. He was hidden away in a like in between some walls or something during the destruction of the temple in 70 A.D. So it traces at least back that far. I believe you could trace it back even further than that, because there's also a story that says that when was it Alexander the Great, after he died, the 4 generals took over, and Ptolemy took over the region wherein the land of Israel and the Jews and the Israelites were. And so, as he was taking stock of the various territories that he was now ruling over, he's like, hey, give me your religious text. Well, they didn't want to give this pagan scumbag their Torah, so they gave him Jasher.
Yes.
And then after he read Jasher, he found out that they were holding out on him, and he demanded that they show him the Torah. And then it was as a result of, oddly enough, it was as a result of the book of Jasher that Ptolemy commanded them to translate it into Greek. And so we have the Septuagint. So we have the book of Jasher to thank for the Septuagint. So you can trace it at least back to, 200 BC or so? When the Septuagint, I think, is somewhere in that time period. So we can trace it back through the Middle Ages, down to the destruction of the temple, and then beyond that, even to Ptolemy. And so, I'm with Lumpkin and Johnson. I'm like, I think that there's good reason to give validity to the book of Jasher. Now, there may be mistakes and errors in it because nobody considered it to be scripture. So they didn't treat it with the same, meticulous reverence that they considered the Torah or any of the other books. So I always say that Jasher is likened unto like the works of Josephus. Nobody considers his writings to be scripture, but you listen to pretty much any pastor or theologian, and at some point they're going to reference, the works of Josephus to validate scripture. So, historical text that people say, helps to validate and elaborate on scripture. They look at Josephus. Same thing with Jasher, in my opinion. They view Jasher much the same way we now view Josephus. But what's intriguing to me is how much of what you read from the Legend of the Jews that is directly correlated in Jasher. I mean, you could put them side by side, and there was many direct references there. Although the centaur one wasn't there. That's what jumped out at me. Mm-hmm. So you said that Satan entered a statue. This is during the days of Enosh.
Right. Yeah, I'll continue because this is the first passage of this paragraph. I'll just read it again. The generation of Enosh were thus the first idol worshippers, and the punishment for their folly was not delayed long. God caused the sea to transgress its bounds, and a portion of the earth was flooded. This was the time also when the mountains became rocks, and the dead bodies of men began to decay. And still another consequence of the sin of idolatry was that the countenances of the men of the following generations were no longer in the likeness and image of God as the countenances of Adam, Seth, and Enosh had been. They resembled centaurs and apes, and the demons lost their fear of men. So I guess because they started following evil and taking on and following after the demons and Satans, that God transformed them into creatures of darkness, or there was the mixing, as we see in the miscegenation of the Book of the Giants, that just as they had did the donkey and created the mule, and that is spoken about in the Keber Nagast, that perhaps that is what's going on as far back as even to the generations following Enosh.
So it sounded like God changed them there. It wasn't
right.
They weren't. It wasn't as a result of direct mating. Doesn't appear to be the result of some kind of direct manipulation of DNA or the blending of species or anything like that. It may be something similar to what happened in the Joshua account of the Tower of Babel. Is that there are three camps that had decided that they were going to wage war with God. One was going to assault heaven and take out the angels. One was going to assault the throne room and do what they do, and then the other was going to go in there and presumably set Nimrod up as the king of the universe there. And I believe it was the ones that their goal was to, I think, if the ones that their goal was to kill God, he made them like unto apes and elephants. And we're going to be it's going to be a while before we get there probably, but when we finally do get to the portion of Genesis talking about the Tower of Babel, we'll read the Joshua account of that as well. But
Yeah, it's not that far.
not too far, but the way we're going,
Yeah. Yeah,
it
I know.
could be a
Yeah,
few
there's so many texts,
could
right?
be a few weeks. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
Oh, I'm sure of that. But the reason I had mentioned as far as the miscegenation is the whole thing with Berosus, that he mentions these centaurs specifically, and then he talks about how there was the blending of the species by the angels and how they had created hybrid human type individuals of every variety. I don't know if you remember me reading that particular
hmm
uh, yeah, but that was all mentioned in that. And so if that is if that is in fact connected to this, then there could be insinuation, or it could be both. Certainly it seems to be here that the consequences are that God is changing them because of their following evil. But certainly in that account of Berosus with the centaurs, it's due to the angels corrupting and creating hybrid races.
hmm. Fascinating. So that may explain then why. I mean, if that happened that early on, like, I mean, we're talking, okay, in the days of Jared, the angels came down and mated with women. Then what's after Jared? Is it
Methuselah,
no? It's Enoch.
Lamech, Enoch.
Enoch.
Yeah, Enoch, and then Lamech and
So
Methuselah, and
is
Noah.
it Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech? I think so.
Hmm.
So
Oh yeah, you're right, because Lamech is the father of Noah.
Well, we could just look up at Genesis
Yeah, 5. Yeah.
5. Let me switch over here. Genesis 5. So, Cana, Enosh, Cana, Mahalalel. That's what I was confused. I couldn't remember where Mahalalel was. So yeah.
Oh yeah, right.
So it's it's Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. So, okay, so in the days of Jared, we have angels coming down and mating with women. The first generation Nephilim are created. They kill each other off within 500 years of that time period. Somewhere during that time period, Jared gives birth to Mahalalel. And then presumably it's in his days, somewhere it gives birth to Enoch. Jared gives birth to Enoch. And it was in his days that we have maybe the pre-flood judgment and the creation of the centaurs that you just described. I'm trying to put a timeline here. I'm trying to put this together in my head.
See when all that happened, yeah.
Because the angels come down first. They mate first with the women. They create the first hybrids, and then it's in that time period that sounds like what you were talking about is still in that time period, right? Because the centaurs, that came after the angels mating with women, correct?
Well,
in
no,
your study?
this
Or is it before?
in this timeline, yeah.
So it's
before.
in the Enosh. That's fascinating. So
Right.
okay, so it's in the days of Enosh then. Wow. Even before the angels came down and mated with women.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a pre-incursion and a post-incursion creation of animal-human hybrids. Wow. And of course a post-flood. I believe that some of that happened again in the post-flood world, but we definitely have it in the pre-flood world.
Most certainly.
Like, to me, for my research, that was the primary reason for the flood, was not the angels mating with women, was the corruption of all flesh through genetic manipulation, which Yeshua said, hey, in the last days, when he comes back, it's going to be as it was in the days of Noah, which in those days, men were beginning to blend species together. But we have a blending of species together even before the angel incursion in the days of Enosh, when they started. And you also mentioned something in there about, was it men that were forcing the change in the movement of the sun, moon, and stars?
Okay, yeah. It says, thus it was until the time of Enosh, when men began to gather gold, silver, gems, and pearls from all parts of the earth, made idols thereof 1,000 parsecs high. What was worse, by means of the magic arts taught them by the angels Uzzah and Azazel, they set themselves as masters. So it's the angels that set themselves as masters over the heavenly spheres, and force the sun and the moon and the stars to be subservient to themselves instead of the Lord. This impelled the angels to ask God, "What is man that thou art mindful of him? Why didst thou abandon the highest of the heavens, the seat of thy glory and thy exalted throne in Arabat, and descend to men who pay worship to idols, putting thee upon a level with them?" The Shekinah was induced to leave the earth and ascend to heaven amidst the blare and flourish of the trumpets of the myriads of the angels. And I believe the Shekinah is the Holy Spirit as well.
Yeah. Wow, dude. Like, my mind is blown. So all that's in Ginsburg. I'm gonna have to go reread and look at and try to again. Like I just have this need to create timeline charts.
Yeah, that's so great that you do that. People have asked me to do that, and I don't have that really skill set. But I believe I sent you all 4 of the Legends of the Jews. Too.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have it. I mean, I've got a library of your books here, so
yeah,
must be in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But I mean, just looking it out online, find digital copies of it, so I can kind of, because with the book Genesis and the Synchronized Biblically Endorsed Extra Biblical Text, I didn't synchronize the entire narrative. I just showed people in the introduction of the book. I showed people how they can specifically, as it pertains to the angel incursion leading up to the flood, like that time period. I just took a snippet and just showed people, by way of example. Okay, here's Genesis, and the story picks up in Enoch, and then it's elaborated on over here what happened with Enoch and Jasher, and then Jubilees. And so I was just showing how you could use Genesis, Enoch, Jasher, and Jubilees together.
Right.
And instead of that might be another future publication, is where I just do the entire book of Genesis. Doing that way, because
yeah, that'd be awesome.
It's like you read a sentence or two, a few verses of Genesis, and then you skip over to Jasher, and then Enoch goes to be with God, and then you skip over to the entire book of Enoch, and so I was just trying to show you, like in the beginning of the book, I put a section just showing people how you can do that. But there are certainly other texts that we've talked about many times here in this series. I'm not sure we have done anything in this series from the Legends of the Jews. I think this is the first time we've done that, because I know you've read from Targums and Mirage and Kabr Nagas and stuff like that, but I think this is the first time we've done Legend of the Jews, and I've always been fascinated by that book. I mean, yes, there may be things in there that are fairy tales, Jewish fables, as they say, but they took the time to record them, so.
Right.
At least it showed that these were some of the bedtime stories that people told their children, maybe Sunday school stories that they taught people. It shows that it was at least in the common vernacular, the common understanding of the scriptures. So
yes, and what was common knowledge back then? Yeah.
Yeah. So we got a couple minutes before we're going to break, according to my timer here. So the angels, so they got men to create idols and do all that kind of stuff. And did the angels teach men to do something to the stars, or was it the angels themselves that caused the stars to do different things?
It's the angels themselves. After they, it says, what was worse, by means of the magic arts taught them by the angels Uzzah and Azazel, they set themselves as masters over the heavenly
That's the part.
spheres.
The antecedent seems to be that it's men. That as a result of what the angels taught them. And if that's the case, then wow. I mean, we've got a couple of things right here that in other words, David says, what is man that thou art mindful? When he considers the heavens. Could it be that I don't know which came first, the writings of David or some of this stuff that ended up in the Legends of the Jews? That story is in a pre-flood context. So could David have been aware of that story in a pre-flood context and then was reflecting back that same saying when he said,
certainly,
when I consider the heavens?
Could be.
And then furthermore, could it be that that Joshua was aware of this story and that he said, okay, well, maybe I can do it, and I'm going to defeat these Nephilim, so I'm going to command the sun and moon to stand still. I mean, why? How did that even enter into his mind?
Right.
Hey, I think I'm going to make the sun stand still so I can finish win this battle. Hang on, we're going to break right now. And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and we're continuing our study of the book of Genesis with taking a look at some of the other extra biblical texts along the way. And I'm joined with my co-host for this series, Zen Garcia. Right before the break, we were talking about some of the things that Zen read from the Legend of the Jews, and specifically the story of angels apparently teaching men to do different things, dark arts that included the ability to change the course of the sun, moon, and stars. And right before the break, I was speculating and wondering if maybe David was aware of some of the things that were quoted, in the pre-flood context when he said, "When I consider the heavens the work of your hands, what is man that you could take note of us?" And also, what was it that inspired Joshua in the middle of this battle to say, you know what, I'm gonna make the sun and moon stand still so I can continue this battle, and of course later we see in the situation of Hezekiah, make the sun go backwards. So, this is pretty extraordinary if men have this ability and have used it, have exercised this ability. Now, of course, apparently this is as a result of dark arts, with the exception of Joshua. That for whatever reason, God decided to honor his command in that regard, make the sun. And this is a huge problem for those who believe in the Copernican model, standard model of cosmology.
Oh yeah, of course.
As we say here in Texas, bless his heart. Doug Hamp tried to say that, well, maybe the Earth was pushed further out in its orbit, and that's what gave the illusion of the sun standing still. I said, well, yeah, but you're missing the part about the moon also. in your model, Doug, and anybody else who wants to believe in that model, if the moon stands still, you've got some major problems with flooding and all kinds of stuff, because you guys believe that the moon is tugging on the waters of the ocean and causing the tides and everything. And in that model, for it to work, I mean, if Doug wants to say, well, the Earth just kept spinning, but it was pushed further out in its orbit, so that would cause all kinds of problems with temperature variations and just complete chaos. And the only other way that you can make that happen, and I used to say this myself when I did lectures talking about this, as I would say, well, if my understanding of cosmology is correct, which it wasn't, but at that time I thought it was, I always said that meant the Earth stopped rotating. The Earth would have to stop rotating for the sun to stand still, and the moon would have had to stop rotating. I mean, in the Copernican, Newtonian, Einsteinian understanding of the cosmos, that would have just ripped the Earth apart. I mean, there would have been such unbelievable chaos just by virtue of the mechanisms and the physics of what they claimed to, is the reality. That would have jacked everything up. Whereas, if the biblical cosmology that we've been talking about for the last 5 years is true, that is clearly laid out for us in the scriptures and certainly in the book of Enoch, then we've just got some little bodies up there, and they're not very big. Even the sun and moon, they're only like 35 miles across, 40 miles at the top side. They are just going around like a clock face over this flat circuit, surface of the clock that we call Earth. Then it's not such a big deal for those things to stop. And things like the tides obviously are controlled by something else other than the moon, although maybe the movement of the sun and moon have something to do with it. But regardless, I mean, we've got precedents in a pre-flood world of men through the knowledge of the angels stopping the sun, or not stopping, but changing this just as it changed the course of the sun and moons. And I'm wondering if that's where the sin of the wandering stars
not coming, before their
if that took
appointed time.
If that's what Judah's talking about.
Yeah, it could very well be. It certainly seems that that could be implied, because that them not coming forward at their appointed time and breaking um, their their whole circuit, and they're established the order as far as the luminaries and the movements of them according to God and what He wanted as far as the clockwork system that He had set up. The breaking that, and whether it was in according here, influence and taught to them by the angels Uzzah and Azazel and men calling forth or doing some kind of whatever magic to get them to be subservient. That's yeah, it certainly caused problems, and especially if that is what is linked to what is implied here, then that cost them dearly for not breaking the order of God.
Yeah, big time. For those who are wondering what I was referring to in Jude, that's Jude 13, Jude verse 13. Raging waves of the sea foaming out their own shame, wandering stars, to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. And that's a part of the description of the judgment of the angels when they send what they experience, chains and darkness and all that kind of stuff. And I always say, this wandering star bit right here, why does God need to judge a fireball? If stars are what we're told they are, burning balls of fire with planets going around them, or wandering stars, or what we now call planets. Why does God need to judge a fireball? Why does God need to judge rock, or a gas ball?
Right, yeah.
This only makes sense if they're sentient beings.
Yes, and angelic celestial entities.
Yeah,
yep, absolutely agreed. And then the whole thing with what we had read in the book of Enoch about, God saying to Abraham, can you number the stars? And then they're being connected to what will be his future descendants. All of that is, interesting. Things that we've never considered before, before doing this particular study. But yeah, all the stars, the luminaries, definitely celestial hosts. And then also that the whole thing, the description in Ezekiel, with all of where he sees all of the angelic beings surrounding the throne of God, encircling him, that this is the same way that these stars are aligned around Polaris and all circling and surrounding and encompassing what would be the heavenly temple and the throne room, which I believe is absolutely located there, above the mount of the congregation and the sides of the north, as is revealed in Isaiah 14, and that is definitely at the North Pole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Somebody was asking in the chat room, didn't you cover the tides in the whole of the north? Yeah, I believe
yes.
You covered that in your
Paradise, sides of the north, and the mount of the congregation.
Yeah, the water's going into that massive whirlpool and coming back out.
Yes.
And so it's
right.
like the earth is breathing.
Right. Yes, the abysmal chasm, what is referred to as the bottomless pit, which is also, where Isaiah 14, again, Lucifer declaring he's going to exalt his throne above the stars and the clouds of God, above the mount of the congregation and the sides of the north, and yet he was cast down into the sides of the pit. That shows, that there is also where the bottomless pit is located, and that he was there cast down into it, and that is his territory. Sheol is his domain, and that this is the hollow earth entrance into the lower worlds, and that this abysmal chasm, as is repeated in so many, even the Greek mythology of Charybdis and stories like Odysseus and Jason and Argonauts, and even the Invencio Fortunata and the journeymen, the explorers that made it up north and report the Havelgamir, which in the Celtic is the great navel of the sea. And that's where all the waters of the oceans are sucked into the interior of the earth, and then every 6 hours expelled in opposite direction, and that this is what causes the low and the high tide. And it makes sense to me that this particular phenomena, as described by these mythologies and also these ancient explorers, that it would absolutely result in a high and a low tide.
Mm-hmm. And that makes a lot more sense to me too. Something of that nature must be taking place, because I mean there are very large lakes that don't experience that. If the whole idea, and I'm like, it never really made sense to me anyway. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it until I finally started to entertain biblical cosmology. But
Right.
I was out for a walk one day, and I'm looking at birds and bees and bugs and dandelion pollen floating around, different things, and I'm just thinking to myself, okay, wait a minute. So you're telling me that the gravity of the moon, which is like over 250,000 miles away, like coming close to 300,000 miles away, the gravity of the moon is so strong that it's lifting up the massive weight of the oceans. I mean, back in my younger days, I serviced vending machines. I had a job doing going to businesses and stuff like that and servicing vending machines, and part of that also included servicing the water bubblers, like the 5-gallon jugs of water you put on the little thing there, the water cooler, and carrying those things around, that stuff's heavy, right? And
yeah, they are.
One day I was like, man, how heavy is this? And I looked up. It's like 1 gallon of water is like 8 pounds, and I'm carrying 5 gallons around, like 40 pounds, and sometimes 2 jugs at a time, like 80 pounds. No wonder, like, my God, I'm going up and down these stairs and stuff like that, and at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, all jacked up, and I'm thinking, okay, if that weighs 40 pounds, then that's just regular water. Salt water weighs more because it's denser, right? So, and how deep is the ocean, and how many gallons are in it? And you're telling me
right.
that this thing that's a quarter of the size of the Earth, and over 250,000 miles away, is grabbing all that weight in the oceans, and yet my 175-pound frame doesn't go flying off into space?
Right.
Like, how does that work? There's so much of that stuff that just didn't make any sense. And being on really large lakes, and the lakes aren't moving around.
Right.
Although some lakes do. I've been to some places where the lakes get a little feisty, but
yeah, if they're connected to the waterways and to the oceans, then there's going to be residual to where they're affected in some manner.
Yeah, and some of it was wind too. Wind kicking up waves and stuff like that on some of the lakes. But yeah, anyway, more and more I just see confirmation of the biblical cosmology in the Book of Enoch and all these others. Certainly, whether anybody else out there wants to believe this or not, it is blatantly obvious that the writers of the scriptures believed it, the Book of Enoch people believed it, and apparently the Ginsburg people believed it. So, and if you believe scripture is divinely inspired by the Holy Spirit and written by men, then the Holy Spirit believes it. So,
well, the whole thing with the sun going back 10 degrees, I mean, that would mean that the Earth stopped rotating,
went backwards,
reverse course, yeah, and then was allowed to
spin back up
its normal, and no earthquakes, no new tsunamis, no pole shifts or anything of that nature. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught it the other day. In fact, I think I forgot to tag you on it. I tagged a bunch of people, and I should have tagged you on it, but you didn't miss much anyway. Danny Faulkner was on with Eric Hovind the other day.
Oh, really?
Kent Hovind's son Eric also has a creation ministry.
Okay.
And so he brought
That's so funny.
Faulkner on to talk about his book Falling Flat, that he published on Flat Earth. And I knew it was going to be horrible. And in fact, almost the entire broadcast they spent looking up into the sky. Of course, he's an astronomer, so fair enough. That's his thing, Danny. But all the so-called proofs for a flat Earth or against a flat Earth was, let's look up in the sky. What's the sun, moon, and stars doing? And I'm like, why is it the first thing everybody does when the topic is the shape of the rock that we're standing on? Why did the first thing you do is look up? And so they had a little Q&A, very, very little. It was just the last few minutes of the broadcast. So, Danny wants to say, the Bible is poetic and, that usual, nonsensical line of thought. All of a sudden, the whole thing is allegorical, physical figures of speech and poetry. I said, okay. So I quoted the passage in Isaiah and also what Yeshua said and what Peter and John said in the book of Revelation about all the stars falling to earth. And I just said, is this poetry? And surprisingly enough, he didn't say that. He said, well, he acknowledged that this is a difficult passage. And I said, it's not difficult at all if you just throw out your preconceived bias. But he didn't take the position that was, because it's not. I don't know how you can read it and say that was allegorical or poetic. It's a statement of fact, and the stars are going to fall like figs. Okay, yeah, you got a simile there, like figs, but that's just saying the stars that you see in the sky are going to fall the same way you see figs fall off a tree. That doesn't negate
here
what it's
to
saying.
the earth.
Yeah, here to the earth, and that's a huge problem for a guy like Danny, who claims to be a Bible believer on one side, and I believe that he is a Christian, but he's also a secular trained astronomer. And he's got a whole career and ministry / job of talking about the stuff that's up in the sky. So I get that that's where his fascination. That was my fascination too, growing up. But you can't reconcile, sorry, Danny, what you believe with what Isaiah said and what Yeshua backed up, and what Peter and John also backed up, saying all that stuff up there is falling to the earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, the first thing all of them really need to do is look for curvature. And then when you find that curvature is non-existent, all of the other stuff that you're claiming, you can throw out the window.
Well, the problem is they use the same, stuff that Aristotle and others said, hey, it looks like ships disappear hull first. And, Danny wants to say that it's, we're both saying refraction. We're both saying atmospheric magnification, that there are things in the atmosphere that cause light to bend. But they're saying, the way they're saying it is very different from the way we're saying it. And I don't know if you saw this. Mark Sargent sent me something. It was on Lake Ontario, I think. Or no, it was on Lake Erie. It was on...
Was it frozen?
No, it wasn't during frozen season. But there's a mill. You could just do a YouTube search for the shrinking mill, and I think it's in Ontario. But is Ontario butt up to Lake Erie? I'd have to go look. I think it's on Lake Erie. Anyway, the shrinking mill. You just do a search. I posted some things on it on my Facebook page right after Mark Sargent sent it to me. But anyway, there's this area where if you're driving towards this area of water where there's a mill. There, it's like in a bay area or something, but you can see that mill from the road, but it looks really big in front of you. But the closer you get to it, the smaller it gets. It shrinks, which is the exact opposite of everything else that we see. Stuff further away is smaller until you get closer to it, and it gets bigger. But this thing gets smaller. Now, some people are trying to say it's an optical illusion. I don't think so. It is an optical illusion, but I don't think it's an optical illusion the way they're saying it. In other words, people will say that the moon looks huge on the horizon, but if you actually take a picture of it and take a ruler to it, and then take the ruler and measure the moon when it's straight up in the sky, it's the same, width across. And they'll say the reason that it just looks bigger is because when it's up in the sky, we don't have anything to compare it to. When it's on the ground, it looks so big compared to, buildings or trees or mountains or whatever may be there. I do think that there are also cases where it is magnified due to the atmosphere. But they were trying to say the same reason why the moon can be the same size high in the sky and when it's on the horizon, but look bigger on the horizon than it does in the sky. They were trying to say that the same thing with the mill. But I've watched that video so many times and I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing this thing get smaller and smaller, like it's really magnified and it's raised up. In other words, when you get closer to it, it starts to drop, on your eye line as well as shrink. You know what I'm saying?
That's strange.
When you're further away, it shouldn't be raised up the way it is. If they're just trying to say it's, because they're trying to say the way the trees in the distance kind of create like a frame, the roads on the ground and the trees around it form like a archway, and so they're trying to say, well, it's just an optical illusion for that. No, this thing's being magnified. And I believe it's being magnified for the same reason that all the tests that we did on Lake Michigan showed that the Chicago skyline's being magnified, because we have all these billions and billions of microscopic dots called moisture in the atmosphere that cause, according to the experts, people who believe in the globe, they say the atmosphere really is acting like a lens. What type of lens? They put a magnifying glass in front of the camera.
The science is the same of that of a lens. Here's a simple example.
So if you're looking at Chicago here,
The atmosphere really is acting like a lens.
yes.
Atmosphere really is acting like a lens, and this is how much of the city is missing due to the lensing effect, the magnification of the atmosphere. You're missing a good portion of the city just by pulling my iPhone back on a 3-foot long desk. That's how much I lost of the city. So it magnifies. But that was a pretty interesting video if you haven't had a chance to see it. The shrinking.
Yeah, no, I haven't, but I'll definitely check it out tomorrow.
But that explains why, and I've shown in multiple tests, why you can have buildings or ships at a distance going away from you due to atmospheric refraction and magnification. It will cause the lower part to disappear. And the problem guys like Danny and others have that want to say, no, it's the curvature that's making it disappear, is nothing ever leans backwards.
Right.
The optics are completely wrong. Whenever you're looking at something at a distance, if you presume you're on a ball and that the ball is obscuring the lower part of the ship or the lower part of the building, then there should be some perception of leaning away. But it's never that way. It's always straight up and down, which is
straight up and down. Absolutely.
Completely off visually.
Right. Yeah, because if it's curved, then it should be on that rotundity.
Yeah.
And leaning away from where we are.
None of the buildings, none of the ships, nothing does that.
Right.
So is all this under Mirage, and then Looming is under Mirage, or what are the semantics of Looming versus Mirage?
Okay, well, that's all. I guess that's all in the details of the terminology. And from what I understand, technically, I think Mirage has to have an inverted image. Whereas there are other atmospheric effects such as looming or towering that are purely displacement, and you don't necessarily have to have an inverted image in order for refractive effects to occur in the atmosphere.
So they would all fall under the category of atmospheric refraction.
I guess that would be a good thing to say. Yes.
Okay, so again, this is their graphic. According to them, we know the Earth's a ball, so therefore this is the way it's working. Chicago's over here on the left. We got the curve of the Earth here, and the light rays, which would normally be going straight across, have to be bent due to the atmospheric lensing, the density of the atmosphere and whatnot, causing the light to refract downward, basically just conveniently enough over the top of the bulge of the curve so that we can see it on the other side. Now, here's where I would differ with this whole idea. Again, just sort of flipping the board. Let's just say we don't start with any preconceived notions of the Earth as a globe. Let's entertain for a moment the completely absurd notion that water is flat and it always seeks its own level. And we're looking across a flat plane of water, 46 miles across. Check this image out right here. Now, I caught this image shortly after Rick and I returned from our trip across the lake. We grabbed a bite to eat, and then we went out to the beach, and it was still clear out, so we got the camera out and looked 46 miles across the lake to see this right here. This image is extraordinary. Okay, the boat right here, I'm going to guess, is less than a mile away. And I base that because these people walking in front of the camera here are walking across some rocks that sort of jut out and kind of fence in the harbor area. And They are only about a quarter of a mile away from where we were when I shot this. I shot this image from right about here. This is where we were looking across, and this is the area right here where those people were walking. And the boat, as you could tell by the size of the people on the boat, wasn't too much further beyond that. So maybe a half mile to a mile, or at the most, I would say, away from where we were. All right, now when I was headed back to Chicago to catch my flight, I snapped this picture of the Willis Tower. And this is, if you go on Google Earth, this is right about the area right here where I believe I was when I took that picture. Looking across, it's only about 0.6 of a mile. So I'm just a little over a half mile away, and look at the size of the tower as compared to the car that was diagonally in front of me. We were looking at the Willis Tower from this direction right here when we were on the other side of the lake. Now, okay, so let me slide the car over and shrink it down to the appropriate scale beside the boat. Do you see something rather interesting here? This building is significantly magnified. The image on the left shows the size and scale of the building next to a car at 0.6 of a mile away. The image on the right shows the same building and the same car with a boat at 46 miles away. The atmosphere really is acting like a lens. What type of lens? A convex lens or a magnifying glass. So I'm going to suggest this is what's happening. The atmosphere is acting like a lens, which magnifies the city, brings it up a little closer, and as it does so, we start to lose a little bit of the bottom of the buildings, and perhaps due to the density in the atmosphere, there's additional refraction that takes place that makes it drop down even more. Is that what happened? Let's look at it from another angle here, from the side view. I'll bring our graphic back in of refraction. Let's go ahead and orient the graphic so it better represents what we're looking at here. I'll angle the light rays to show the density of the air here causing the refraction, and bring our lens in so we can magnify the city. It brings the city up, and as it does so, we start to lose a little bit of the bottom of the city, and perhaps either due to the magnification or due to additional refraction, maybe it is dropped down a little bit more, and this is what we end up with. Just like we saw. Now this is a still frame from the half-hour video that I did, and the numbers you see there are all based on the numbers that Tony was giving me based on his device. His device said it was 37 nautical miles, which is 42.6 statute miles, but when you plot the same exact location that we were at, the exact distance you get on Google Earth is 46 miles. So you basically add about 4 miles to all the numbers that you saw in the half-hour video. But here's where it gets interesting, at least to me. Both of these pictures were taken with the same camera. Now, if you remember from the half-hour Chicago skyline video, I was saying I can see Chicago. We're about 42 miles away. I can see it. The problem is trying to get the camera's having trouble focusing on it because it's moving up and down and it's so zoomed in. But I can totally see it. Rick was not zoomed all the way in. He was using my camera, the Nikon Coolpix P900, but he was only zoomed in about halfway when he grabbed the shot above. Now I know that when I got the image below, I was zoomed all the way in. And so some people may point to one of my videos where I was actually debunking myself. If you remember that NASA video showing the Earth and the Moon, and the moon was going in front of the Earth. So I did a little experiment where I used a baseball as a moon and a larger ball as the Earth. And I got at the end of a long hallway with my Canon 70D and zoom lens, zoomed all the way in on it, and this was the image that I captured doing this experiment. There's the NASA image on top, and there's my image. And so, you know, just by virtue of the lens, it does magnify the distant object to make it look proportionately large to the object that is closer to you. So is that what's happening here? Well, both of these images were shot from the harbor area here. The red line at the top is where we were in the boat. We're just about to depart when I asked Tony to stop, and I got the camera out to shoot Chicago. And the lower red line is where we were on the beach when I took the picture on the bottom there. So, and the distance between those two locations is less than a quarter of a mile. So it's negligible. We're still looking about 46 miles across either way. Now, here's the shot from the beach before I zoomed in. Now I'm zooming in, and I'm going to stop it right about here. That's about halfway on the zoom, and I believe that's where Rick had the camera set when he took the picture above. Based on the size of the building right here, I'm going to guess that he was about halfway. Alright, so let's go ahead and continue the zoom. And this is zoomed all the way in. The Nikon Coolpix P900 has an 83 power optical zoom, and that little punch in right after that was the digital zoom afterward. It has a digital zoom that goes beyond the 83 power. I did not go all the way in with that. I just punched it a little bit because I wanted to frame it with the ship right there. So that's 83 power plus. So gonna guess it's probably the equivalent of about maybe 90 power zoom or so right here. Now let's bring the picture in from the halfway zoom, and I'm going to go ahead and bring our car back in and slide the picture in from Chicago, and I'm going to scale the car to the appropriate size to the boat right here and go ahead and slide the car over to the building. So this is what the car and the building look like at half zoom. So let's try something else here. I'm going to unfreeze the video and back it off so it goes backwards, and we're zooming out back to the shoreline, and now I'm going to bring it forward again, and let's see, right about here is where we have some fairly decent resolution where you can still make out the building. I'm going to zoom in here with the computer. This is a computer zoom now on this still image, and I'm going to bring the other image in from the half zoom and scale the car over to the digitally zoomed in image of the almost completely zoomed out shot. And so you got three different zooms here. One almost completely zoomed out, one zoomed about halfway on an 83 power optical zoom lens, and the one on the right, of course, all the way zoomed in with a little touch of digital zoom on top of that in the camera. And when looking at these images compared to the one on the left, which is just shot with my iPhone, I got to tell you, it looks like it's being magnified to me, especially when you consider the fact that that building is like 45 miles away from that boat. It's 45 miles away. So looks like there's some serious magnification going on here. And, you know, some of that could be due to the lens, I'll give you that. But I also know what I could see with my own eyes. Now, I understand you may not want to take my word for it, so all I can say is go up there and do it yourself. But based on what I saw with my own eyes, as well as what the quote-unquote experts had to say regarding how the atmosphere can act like a magnifying glass, I'm still going to go with it as being magnified. Again, you can go out there and test it for yourself. But remember, let's just go back and hear from the experts once again about what they say is happening.
The science is the same of that of a lens. Here's a simple example.
So if you're looking at Chicago here, just maybe now you can just see the top of the Sears Tower, and if our simulated temperature inversion moves into place, hopefully now you can see pretty much all of Chicago,
see all the lower buildings,
including what's at ground level.
So the atmosphere really is acting like a lens.
Yes.
And the fact that you can see things further than the supposed, formula for measuring out curvature. I mean,
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, especially with the infrared photography, people doing infrared,
No doubt.
and lasers shooting across really far distances, line of sight lasers painting targets 100 miles away, impossible on a ball. Microwave technology that's also line of sight, beaming across the Mediterranean Sea. Again, there's so many world records that they don't even realize. They're doing these world records, but they don't realize while they're doing it that it disproves the ball.
Right, absolutely, without a doubt.
So, anyway, we got about 4 minutes before we go to our next break. The passage you were reading from also confirmed the Book of Enoch with the 3,000 L's, so that was interesting.
That was interesting.
Legends of the Jews verbatim backed up what the Book of Enoch also said.
Yeah, this is a fascinating read. I mean, and when you read all 4 of the books, that have so much information, like, even the passage on Asenath being the daughter of Dinah, there's so much added information in these particular texts, and
which I think Jasher does too. I think he gives that story too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's why I love, reading and studying, and I think that the people that are listening into the shows that we're doing and how we did that with the Book of Enoch are, greatly blessed by a lot of material that they probably have never heard before. And for us to be doing this with the Genesis Revisited series, I think is going to be fascinating as well, because there's a lot of information. Like when we go into the story of Noah and all, I've got a lot of manuscripts lined up.
Oh yeah, I mean, it seems like we're going to be camped out at Genesis 6 through 8 probably for a while at this rate.
Right.
Let's see. We got a few minutes before break. I don't have time to really read anything. Do you think we should read Jubilees? Jubilees. I'm trying to think if Jubilees has anything major different. There, I mean, it does have some different. One of the things I did notice that there is some discrepancies, though, is between like Jasher and Jubilees, especially. There will be some discrepancies in names and dates, and times, and some other texts too talk about who married who.
Right. Yeah, I find that there's variations in that in a lot of the different manuscripts as far as who married who and who begot who, and as far as wives and all that. But yeah, I think when we come back, you should read Jubilees, because
okay,
we're adding everything. So
why not? So we'll be when we come back from the break, we'll look at Jubilees chapter 4. That's probably as far as we'll get. Maybe we can do some talking on that. I did notice something else that caught my attention in what you were reading, though, was the 243 years. I think it said, was it 243 years that Enoch had prevailed, or was teaching, or was in some
right
measure.
Yeah, that he was with the sons of men as far as teaching them and being the king, which we had talked about
in Jasher.
That one passage, about the 500 years and how he was in this hidden place, and this particular text seems to imply that he had departed to this hidden place even before, and then God made him come back and teach the children of men, and then he started to recede again.
When we read Jasher chapter 3, months back in December, probably.
Right.
I mean, it gave the same story, that he spent so much time with men and so much time with God, and then the numbers started to flip to where he was spending the majority of his time with God and the least amount of time, like a week or a day or whatever, with men. So Ginsburg was, maybe he's just actually, Legends of the Jews is probably just a compilation of these things. So he's probably just quoting directly from Jasher and from Enoch and from these other things.
He just basically put it, compiled it and put it in a timeline.
Yeah. Well, cool. All right. So this will take us into our final break, and then when we come back from the break, we will read from the book of Jubilees. back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and we are in the final segment of the broadcast, and I'm talking with my friend and co-host, Zen Garcia. We're talking about the book of Genesis, and we're bringing in other texts like the book of Jasher and Ginsburg's Legends of the Jews, and now I'm going to read from the book of Jubilees, and we'll pick up the story in Jubilees chapter 4. And in the third week, in the second Jubilee, she, I believe this is talking about Eve here. Let me scroll up. It's in two columns here, so I got to scroll up here. Gave birth, to Cain. And in the fourth, she gave birth to Abel. And in the fifth, she gave birth to her daughter Awan. And in the first year of the third Jubilee, Cain slew Abel, because God accepted the sacrifice of Abel and did not accept the offering of Cain. And he slew him in the field, and his blood cried from the ground to heaven, complaining because he had slain him. And the Lord reproved Cain because of Abel, because he had slain him, and he made him a fugitive on the earth because of the blood of his brother, and he cursed him upon the earth. And on this account it is written on the heavenly tablets, or heavenly tables, cursed is he who smites his neighbor treacherously. And let all who have seen and heard say, so be it. And the man who has seen and not declared it, let him be accursed as the other. And for this reason we announce, when we come before the Lord our God, all the sin which is committed in heaven and on earth, and in light and in darkness and everywhere. And Adam and his wife mourned for Abel 4 weeks of years. And in the fourth year of the fifth week they became joyful. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare him a son. And he called his name Seth. For he said, God has raised up a second seed unto us on the earth instead of Abel, for Cain slew him. That's interesting. A second seed raised us. Raised us as in us, Adam and Eve, a second seed. This would be a third if we're talking about Adam and Eve being the only two, creating children here.
Right.
In the sixth week, he begat his daughter Azurah. And Cain took Awan, his sister, to be his wife, and she bare him Enoch. This is a different Enoch, at the close of the fourth Jubilee. And in the first year of the first week of the fifth Jubilee, houses were built on the earth, and Cain built a city, and called its name after the name of his son Enoch. And Adam knew his wife Eve, and she bare yet 9 sons. And in the fifth week of the fifth Jubilee, Seth took Azurah his sister to be his wife. And in the fourth year of the sixth week, she bare him Enos. He began to call on the name of the Lord on the earth. And in the seventh Jubilee, in the third week, Enos took Noam his sister to be his wife, and she bare him a son in the third year of the fifth week, and he called his name Kenan. And at the close of the eighth Jubilee, Kenan took Muelaleth, his sister, to be his wife, and she bare him a son in the ninth Jubilee, in the first week, in the third year of this week, and she called his name Mahalalel. And in the second week of the 10th Jubilee, Mahalalel took unto him a wife, Dinah, the daughter of Barachiel, the daughter of his father's brother, and she bare him a son in the third week, in the 6th year, and he called his name Jared. For in his days the angel of the Lord descended on the earth, who are named the Watchers, that they should instruct the children of men, and that they should do judgment and uprightness on the earth. And in the 11th Jubilee, Jared took to himself a wife, and her name is Barakah, the daughter of Razujal, the daughter of his father's brother, in the fourth week of this Jubilee, and she bare him a son in the fifth week, in the fourth year of the Jubilee, and he called his name Enoch. And he was the first among men to be born on earth, who learned writing and knowledge and wisdom, and who wrote down the signs of heaven according to the order of their months in a book, that men might know the seasons of the years according to the order of their separate months. And he was the first to write a testimony, and he testified to the sons of men among the generations of the earth, and recounted the weeks of the Jubilees, and made known to them the days of the years, and set in order the months, and recounted the Sabbaths of the years, as he made them known to him. Scrolling up here. And what was and what will be, he saw in a vision of his sleep, as it will happen to the children of men throughout their generations until the day of judgment. He saw and understood everything, and wrote his testimony, placed the testimony on earth for all the children of men and for their generations. And in the 12th Jubilee, in the 7th week thereof, he took to himself a wife, and her name was Edna, the daughter of Danael, the daughter of his father's brother. And in the 6th year, in this week, she bare him a son, and he called his name Methuselah. And he was moreover with the angels of God these 6 jubilees of years, and they showed him everything which is on earth and in the heavens, the rule of the sun, and he wrote down everything. And he testified to the watchers who had sinned with the daughters of men, for these had begun to unite themselves so as to be defiled with the daughters of men. And Enoch testified against them all. And he was taken from amongst the children of men, and he conducted him into the Garden of Eden in majesty and honor. And behold, there he writes down the condemnation and judgment of the world, and all the wickedness of the children of men. And on account of it, God brought the waters of the flood upon all the land of Eden, for there he was set as a sign that he should testify against all the children of men, that he should recount all the deeds of the generations unto the day of condemnation. And he burnt the incense of the sanctuary, even sweet spices acceptable before the Lord on the mount. For the Lord has 4 places on the earth, the Garden of Eden, the Mount of the East, and this mountain on which thou art this day, Mount Sinai, and Mount Sion, which will be sanctified in the new creation for a sanctification of the earth. Through it will the earth be sanctified from all its guilt and its uncleanness throughout all the generations of the world. In the 14th Jubilee, Methuselah took unto himself a wife, Edna, the daughter of Azrael, the daughter of his father's brother, in the 3rd week, in the 1st year of this week, and he begat a son, and called his name Lamech. And in the 15th Jubilee, in the 3rd week, Lamech took himself a wife, and her name was Betanos, the daughter of Barachiel, the daughter of his father's brother. And in the week she bare him a son, and he called his name Noah, saying, This one will comfort me for my trouble and all my work, and for the ground which the Lord hath cursed. And at the close of the 19th Jubilee, in the 7th week, in the 6th year thereof, Adam died, and all his sons buried him in the land of his creation, and he was the first to be buried in the earth. And he lacked 70 years of 1,000 years, for 1,000 years are as one day in the testimony of the heavens, and therefore was it written concerning the tree of knowledge, On the day that ye eat thereof ye shall die. For this reason he did not complete the years of this day, for he died during it. At the close of this Jubilee, Cain was killed after him in the same year, for his house fell upon him, and he died in the midst of his house, and he was killed by its stones. For with a stone he had killed Abel, and by a stone he killed in righteous judgment. For this reason it was ordained on the heavenly tablets, with the instrument with which a man kills his neighbor, with the same shall he be killed. After the manner that he wounded him, in like manner shall they deal with him. And in the 25th Jubilee, Noah took to himself a wife, and her name was Emzara, the daughter of Rachiel, the daughter of his father's brother, in the 1st year, in the 5th week, and in the 3rd year thereof she bare him Shem. In the 5th year thereof she bare him Ham, and in the 1st year, in the 6th week, she bare him Japheth. Okay, so Jubilees definitely varies in quite a number of ways here.
Mm-hmm.
And, so then you basically have to decide, okay, which text do you give the most authority to? Right. Which one are you going to believe? Like, for instance, Jasher tells you that Lamech, the other Lamech, the one that had 2 wives from Cain's line, shot an arrow and mistakenly
killed Cain.
Cain. So here we see that his house fell on him. So of course, it could be one of those deals where maybe both is true. Like in the case of the story of Judas. One says he went out and hanged himself, and the other says he fell on the rocks and was disemboweled. And I said, well, you can reconcile that by if he was hanging from a tree and he began to bloat, as he decayed up there, and a bird or something, or even just the weight of his body caused the branch to break or the rope to snap, and then he fell down and burst forth on rocks. So both could be true.
Yeah, actually, there is and I don't remember exactly what text, but there is a text that describes that when he was hanging, after he hung himself, that he then also became disemboweled, that the curse, and I don't know exactly what it was that caused it, but he did burst forth and his bowels did come forth like that.
Yeah, so there are, there can be ways to reconcile stories that appear to be different. So maybe, Lamech shot him with an arrow, they went to see him and they thought he was dead and he wasn't. He went back home and then his house fell on him. It's conceivable. Anyway, you could conceive of a scenario where both could be true. But the problem that I have here is where you have different wives being named. I think it's Jasher. It tells you that Noah married Naamah, who was a daughter of Eliakim, who was Methuselah's brother. So now I know you've also written stuff about Naamah being the Naamah of the line of Cain. My problem with that Naamah is she would be way older than 1,000 years old. The chronology's wrong. So if he married the Naamah of the who was the daughter of Eliakim, then she would be about 100 years older than Noah. So he married an older woman, 100 years older. It would be something like 12 to 1,400 years. I forget. I did the math out a while back if it was the Naamah of the line of Cain.
I don't know what the exact years. I just know that, in the book of Jasher in chapter 5, it says Naamah, the daughter of Enoch. Which would be the seventh.
That's correct.
Yes,
it's the
generation.
son. I had it wrong. The wives of the three sons were of Eliakim. So Naamah was the daughter of Enoch.
Enoch
directly, and apparently Enoch, I think, or Methuselah. I think Methuselah had a brother named Eliakim. One of them did, and that's where he got the daughters to be wives for his three sons. So
and then, but I was reading in the Legends of the Jews earlier about Noah, and it actually says, which I think it could be a typo, it says that he married Naamah, the daughter of Enosh, which, that would be a lot earlier. And so I think that might be a typo, and that it's actually confirming what was written in the book of Jasher as far as Naamah, from the line, daughter of Enoch, which would make more sense because it would be closer to him.
And closer chronologically. And
yes.
Also, Enoch was so righteous that God took him. So that would be a good wife for Enoch, who was, Noah, who was also born, we talked about in a previous broadcast where Enoch, the book of Enoch, talks about his birth, that he was an albino, probably.
Right.
That, was a peculiar baby, but certainly, a righteous child, who lived a life of righteousness. And so, the way I say it is like Noah was found righteous in his generations, as pure in his generations, that was tamim, genetically pure, and also spiritually pure. And the daughter of Enoch would certainly be a good pick for a wife for him. So I maintain that Noah and his wife were genetically pure, and then as a result that his three sons were genetically pure. That doesn't account for the three wives. But there's something else that was different here in the book of Jubilees was the birth order.
Yes.
Most texts.
Yeah, I think that's important, and I was actually going to bring that up because I believe the third child is, as I was writing in the writings of Abraham, it says that he was instructed to take Nama, who was of the line of Cain, the sister of Tubal-Cain, in order for the Satan seed, the serpent seed, to be preserved through the flood, and that Ham was born of that particular marriage, which in the book of Jasher, it says that, the Nama that he married was the daughter of Enoch, and that Shem and Japheth were born from that marriage,
That's
and they
interesting.
went in the ways of their father. And so I, just from the scriptures, possibly that he had married two Namas from both different lines is what I take, and that God had told him to preserve the seed of the serpent through the flood through Nama, and that Ham being born of her being serpent seed, that when he saw the nakedness of his father, meaning that he slept with his mother, and that Canaan was a result born from that he would be more than 50% as far as serpent seed. So
Yeah, I'm gonna let you hang out on that one for yourself, because I'll get
Yeah.
crucified on that one. Because you just that would make, oh boy, in this particular climate, a whole lot of people upset. I maintain that Ham is just as pure as his other two brothers, and that the wives brought in the issue here. But it also mentions the birth order in a different. It says that Shem was first in the 5th year, and then Ham, and then Japheth. And I believe Genesis even refutes that. I believe I'd have to go look into it in various places that references it, but that I believe that Japheth is the firstborn, Shem is the secondborn, and Ham is the thirdborn. I'd have to go and confirm that, though. This order is definitely different from other places that I've read.
Well, what is interesting about that, and I do believe is that in Scripture it does say that Japheth was born first. But what is interesting is that we only have the life of Shem, as far as the, him living 600 years, mentioned, and there's no other mention of the other two brothers as far as their full lifeline, and that always makes me wonder as to why. But certainly in the book of Jasher and other places, it seems that Noah and Shem were contemporary with Abraham, and Abraham
Correct.
was 39 years when he went and, or he was 13 and stayed till he was 39, when he was led from the cave to where the tent of Shem was, and then he became indoctrinated into the Church of the Firstborn, the Order of the Ancients, and then at 39 he left and went back to where Nimrod and Babylon and all that.
Yeah, we're gonna have a lot to talk about when we get to the Abraham Nimrod timeline. There's a lot going on there. I might have time to get through Jasher chapter 5. I'll give it a shot here.
Yeah, I think so.
Because it elaborates on what we just talked about, and covers some of the same territory Jubilees did, so we can see the difference. Jasher chapter 5. And it was in the 84th year of the life of Noah that Enoch, the son of Seth, died. He was 905 years old at his death. And in 179th year of the life of Noah, Canaan, the son of Enosh, died, and all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. And in the 234th year of the life of Noah, Mahalalel, the son of Canaan, died, and in the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. And Jared, the son of Mahalalel, died in those days in the 336th year of the life of Noah, and all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. And all who followed the Lord died in those days before they saw the evil which God declared to do upon earth. And after the lapse of many years, in the 408th year of the life of Noah, when all those men who followed the Lord had died, away from amongst the sons of men, and only Methuselah was then left, God said unto Noah and Methuselah, saying, Speak ye and proclaim to the sons of men, saying, Thus saith the Lord, Return from your evil ways and forsake your works, and the Lord will repent of the evil that he declared to do to you, so that it shall not come to pass. For thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will give you a period of 120 years. If you will turn to me and forsake your evil ways, then will I also turn away from the evil which I told you, and it shall not exist, saith the Lord. This is the Genesis 6:3 warning. And Noah and Methuselah spoke all the words of the Lord to the sons of men, day after day, constantly speaking to them. But the sons of men would not hearken to them, nor incline their ears to their words, and they were stiff-necked. And the Lord granted them a period of 120 years, saying, If they will return, then will God repent of the evil, so as not to destroy the earth. Noah, the son of Lamech, refrained from taking a wife in those days to beget children, for he said, Surely now God will destroy the earth, wherefore then shall I beget children? And Noah was a just man, and was perfect in his generation. And the Lord chose him to raise up seed from his seed upon the face of the earth. And the Lord said unto Noah, Take unto thee a wife, and beget children, for I have seen thee righteous before me in this generation. And thou shalt raise up seed, and thy children with thee, in the midst of the earth. And Noah went and took a wife, and he chose Naamah, the daughter of Enoch, and she was 580 years old. And Noah was 498 years old when he took Naamah for a wife. And Naamah conceived and bare a son, and he called his name Japheth, saying, God hath enlarged me in the earth. And she conceived again and bare a son, and he called his name Shem, saying, God has made me a remnant to raise up seed in the midst of the earth. And Noah was 502 years old when Naamah bare Shem. And the boys grew up and went in the ways of the Lord, in all that Methuselah and Noah their father taught them. And Lamech the father of Noah died in those days, yet verily he did not go with his heart in the ways of his father, and he died in the 195th year of the life of Noah. And all the days of Lamech were 770 years, and he died. And all the sons of men who knew the Lord died in that year before the Lord brought evil upon them. For the Lord willed them to die, so as not to behold the evil that God would bring upon their brothers and relatives, as he had declared to do. In that time the Lord said to Noah and Methuselah, Stand forth and proclaim to the sons of men all the words that I spoke to you in those days. Peradventure they may return from their evil ways, and I will then repent of the evil, and will not bring it. And Noah and Methuselah stood forth, and said in the ears of the sons of men that all that God had spoken concerning them. But the sons of men would not hearken, neither would they incline their ears to all their declarations. And it was after this that the Lord said to Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, on account of their evil deeds. And behold, I will destroy the earth. And do thou take unto thee gopher wood, and go to a certain place, and make a large ark, and place in it that spot. And thus shalt thou make it, 300 cubits in length, 50 cubits broad, and 30 cubits high. And thou shalt make unto thee a door, open at its side, and to a cubit thou shalt finish above, and cover it within and without with pitch. And behold, I will bring the flood of waters upon the earth, and all flesh be destroyed. From under the heavens all that is upon earth shall perish. And thou and thy household shall go and gather 2 couple of all living things, male and female, and shall bring them to the ark to raise up seed from upon earth. And gather unto thee all food that is eaten by all the animals, that there may be food for thee and for them. And thou shalt choose for thy sons 3 maidens from the daughters of men, and they shall be wives to thy sons. And Noah rose up and made the ark in the place where God had commanded him. And Noah did as God had ordered him. In his 595th year, Noah commenced to build the ark, and he made the ark in 5 years, as the Lord had commanded. Then Noah took the 3 daughters of Eliakim, son of Methuselah, for wives for his sons, as the Lord had commanded Noah. And it was at that time Methuselah, the son of Enoch, died. 960 years old was he at his death. So, couple things. Of course, we have the birth order. This is the birth order that is confirmed in Scripture. Same birth order. Man, we're going to go to break. Not go to break. The show's going to be over in 2 minutes. Yeah, so there are different ages here. Methuselah's 969 years in Scripture, 960 years
Oldest
here.
man, yes.
Lamech was 777 years, I believe, in Scripture. I think here it says 770. So there are discrepancies in numbers here. I did find it interesting, though. It was in the Jubilees account that we read. I forgot to make a comment about this. That the explanation of Adam dying, in the day that you eat thereof, you shall surely die, being that God reckons days by 1,000 earth years.
Right.
Which again,
Exactly.
where did Peter come up with that? Right. When Peter says, for we know.
Right.
That,
Exactly.
I mean, Scripture's not written in a void. I mean, these people, the authors of Scripture, were clearly familiar with the content of the texts that we're reading. Here this evening. So that's where we get, that's where Peter got that idea. A day with the Lord is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day. Jubilees tells you that, point blank right there.
Yes.
So, man, we got like a minute left before the end of the broadcast. Maybe if you had anything you wanted to say on this, we'll save it for your show next week. Any commentary on Jasher chapter 5?
I'll just say that really quickly that, again, in the day that you eat thereof, you shall die. And it's my opinion that when they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that's when they came under the authority of death and took on mortal form.
Yep. And it was from that point on that they began to die, and nobody lived beyond the 1,000-year mark. Everybody died,
Right.
Methuselah being the older recorded person dying at 969 years. So, again, that would disqualify the Naamah of the line of Cain. But there was something also, we're out of time. Well, maybe we'll do some more commentary on your show next week. All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you guys so much.
All right.
Thanks, Zen.
Be blessed, brother. Good night, all.
Good night, everybody.
Shalom.
Have a good one. See you next week.